as an interviewer that has interviewed several different coaches, you think I would talk about the subject of coaching within the hundreds of videos that I've produced. And what I find funny about this whole idea of coaching philosophy that I like to kind of put about is that it seems as though a lot of coaches don't actually philosophize about their coaching ideas or ideologies. And they haven't put much effort into that particular type of thought process, right? To then have that be their guiding light, right? To get through the darkness, so to speak. And so I think there are a couple different things that you can do as a coach when it comes to thinking about your philosophy. First of all, you have to discover your axioms and whatnot of what you actually believe. And previously, I actually did a video on the title was Discover Your Axioms. And it was the broader concept of, basically like your morality about life as such. But you can also transition that to your philosophy about a particular subject. So I think there are a couple core philosophies within coaching that seem to not really be talked about a whole lot, or rather maybe overlooked or just completely not thought about at all. And the first big one I would say is that if you are going to try and coach an entire veteran roster, you're going to be fucked if you aren't an experienced coach, because you don't have anything to really back up your words, right? You have no prior accomplishments. You have nothing really going for you in terms of your track record. And so you're already going to be at the lower end in terms of exactly how you command this squad of players, or at least work with them and have them trust your advice and trust your word. Not everything actually goes off of logic, right? Especially considering that a lot of people have a different type of logic, so to speak, right? So, or different ways to, I guess, process a problem and solve a problem, right? Because there are different ways, pathways to solve a problem. And just because you can break it down logically about maybe your pathway, that doesn't mean another pathway doesn't exist. And you have to prove that your pathway is actually the correct one that they should be choosing. And so I think this is very difficult when coaching an entire veteran roster, and even worse if you're coaching, a super team, right? Because then it just becomes way harder and there's so many egos within the way. So just that in the outset, I would try and avoid as much as possible if you're within, the coaching position, right? Is just try and avoid entire veteran rosters, because they're all going to kind of be stuck in their ways. And if you aren't incredibly experienced, then you really are just shooting yourself in the foot, so to speak, right? Second thing is, I think this is very underrated in the fact that you need to earn the trust of whoever is, a big vocal voice on the team. Now, notice that I didn't say superstar of the team or star player of the team. You don't even need to gain the trust of that particular player, wholeheartedly. That shouldn't even be your objective. In fact, you should have to try and convince all these other players to maybe play around this player, right? And so therefore you need to gain the trust of all these other players. And you could let the star player do whatever the fuck that they want. It doesn't really matter at that point. So with that said, though, you also have to have an advocate on the player's side that, whenever you have an idea, or maybe when you're a little bit harsh on another player, like this player that is very vocal and kind of on your side can back you up in terms of just being on the player side, right? Because it's a very different level when it comes from a player versus when it comes from a coach. So to cover your bases, you have to get the buy-in from one of the vocal voices that will then help you gain the trust of all the other players themselves, right? And it, like I said, it doesn't have to be the star player. And in fact, I would rather it not be the star player too. Because then if you do have it as the star player, it becomes like this top-down sort of pecking order, right, of just the coach and then the star player. And so everyone has to listen to that. And, that can easily create kind of a bad I don't want to say toxic relationship, but that seems to be the word being thrown around a lot. Let's just say it doesn't create a type of team cohesion that can actually stick together very well without, fucking scotch tape. Instead you want to be using some goddamn Gorilla Glue, right? So another thing, with that said, even if you have the buy-in of a particular player, you do need to be the bad guy at some point. And what is probably better is to have this good cop, bad cop scenario, maybe with your assistant coach. And this is the classic, psychological aspect, right? Of if you've ever watched any of those interrogation videos or whatnot, it's that there is one cop that is softer, and it's just like, the main guy comes in, starts slamming on the table, like, look, dude, like, you're in a lot of fucking trouble. You're gonna get the fucking banhammer. You're gonna get 20 years. Just confess, do all this shit. And then the other guy comes in here and he's just like, look, dude, like, you fucked up. Yeah, I know. But I can get you an out. You just gotta cooperate with me, man. And so you need that type of dynamic within any type of leadership. In fact, there should always be one of the ones, in leadership that is the softer figure, that is kind of more relatable. And also, it's the guy to where the players are very comfortable going to speak about their problems, about maybe the problems that they have with the head coach or the assistant coach, and, just exactly what's going wrong with the entire team. Because if you've ever been inside a company, right, people are afraid when the big boss comes around, and he walks into a store or something, and, maybe he's the owner of the store or whatnot, or the CEO. It's like, oh, everyone's on their, P's and Q's. But maybe you have someone that's a couple pegs down from him that walks in the store and no one really bats an eye, right? It's Craig, right, that walks into the store, and everyone likes Craig, and he's kind of the cool guy, and they can kind of be amicable to him and whatnot. But, God forbid if they talk to, Toby, the CEO, it's just like, no, that's not how it goes. So, and that comes with the title in and of itself too, right? It comes this kind of grandeur, I guess, right? And so with that, you can have this other person reflect, I guess, like the milieu of exactly the experience that the players are feeling, and then that can be translated over into the head coach or the assistant coach, depending on how you want to bounce it, right? So I think that's actually incredibly underrated. But also, too, is that if there is someone playing the bad cop or the more stern one, you can't afford having a bad relationship even with one player. And the reason for that being, and I think this gets mixed up a lot when it comes to translating this from traditional sports versus esports, is the fact that the teams are so fucking small within esports, right? You only have 5 players. And then you have your academy team too, but it's like, well, the head coach of academy is running that shit, right? So you aren't really day to day on that. So really, you can't afford to have a bad relationship with any player, in fact, right? So it can't be that you go in the hard direction of the bad cop scenario, right? You can't go full on bad cop, maybe like you would, if you were running like an NFL team, right? And you're the head coach of an NFL team. It's like, first of all, there's a whole bunch of different support staffs in an NFL team, right? And then second of all, there are 10 players, right, on the main team or whatnot, and then you have the second string of 10 more players, and I think I'm getting that right. I don't fucking know football, but point is, there's a lot of bodies on there, so that means that yes, you can afford to be kind of an asshole to a couple different players, right? It's not gonna hurt the entire team, right, as much as it would in esports, just because there are fewer players. Now, with all of that said of the whole good cop bad cop scenario, you should know which player you can go hard on and which players that you can't, right? You should know the ones that you can press a little bit more and be a little bit more stern with them and more serious or blunt. And you should also know the players that you have to kind of soften your touch with and kind of curve around the problem just a little bit and say it in such a way to where you can actually not hurt that player's feelings, or maybe hurt their certain circumstance or whatnot, or maybe their play style, maybe they're playing bad in this way, but they're sensitive about this subject. So you got to be careful, and you have to know exactly the personalities of each of your different players and then shape your coaching around that, right? That's like one of the basic 101s of coaching, but it doesn't seem like that's being done. And it's either seeming that coaches are just doing it all too soft, or they're doing it all too hard, and they aren't adapting their coaching philosophy to each specific player and having it be a little bit more malleable. Because I mean, when I say philosophy, I don't mean that you have these hard set rules that you go by. It's the broader sense. It's the broader like cosmos of your thought then that you can apply to, this particular situation. But like I said, it's a cosmos, right? It's a huge wide expanse. So that means that it's able to be malleable, right? So, but with all of that said, of just not going hard on a player too, you also don't want to become their friend. That's one of the worst things. In fact, I think that's in the other direction too, of being, too professional or too unapproachable, to then also being too approachable, right? And that when you get into this friendship relationship within a business too much, to where people can kind of joke with you or shit talk you or whatnot, that's cool to a certain extent. But when it gets out of hand, especially when there's the hierarchical relationship, that's when it becomes a problem, because then it interferes with work, right? They don't take things that you say as seriously, and so they end up off playing, the comments that you are actually giving as constructive criticism, but in fact they maybe think it's a joke because, they feel buddy with you, and you don't want to create that type of relationship. There's got to be some fine line in the sand to where, players know not to cross this area, and vice versa, right? And so with that said, I think if you're in this esports industry and whatnot, and you're trying to be likable to everyone and all these players and whatnot, you're creating this precedent to where now you can be pushed on certain subjects even further than you want to be pushed upon, right? When you're trying to construct a particular play style of a team or certain habits within a team, then you can get pushed out of that to where now you really aren't in control of your team. And most importantly, you aren't doing the job of what a head coach is supposed to be. Lastly, I think, and this is probably something that a lot of modern esports coaches don't even instill within their teams and their culture, is to create a system of ownership and accountability. I think this is incredibly lacking, especially with the fucking modern day and age, right? But it's the idea that if you are to create all these systems, right, to where you have this analyst that is supposed to be getting you all these different VODs and perspectives to then give you and feed you information and whatnot. Well, why can't that same system of ownership and accountability and responsibility of their tasks as an analyst, why can't that same thought process be applied to a player? It's like, hey, you're responsible, for learning these particular types of champions. I want you to own that shit. And we need to be clear on exactly what types of things you have to have ownership of, right? And if you fail to meet those, then it's like, okay, well, now we know exactly what you need to work on. Because when you have an entire system, like, say, a company, and you have multiple people working on a particular problem, right? So say, for instance, you're in the food industry, and someone is in charge of the ticket system, right? That person, if anything goes wrong with the ticket system, go to fucking George. George is responsible for the ticket system that prints out the tickets for all the orders and stuff, all the online orders from like Postmates or something, and also all the in-house orders at all the different tables and stuff, right? He's responsible for that. And so that becomes way more clear cut, because otherwise, if you don't have that type of system implemented, then all the blame can be pushed off a little bit here, a little bit there. George says, oh no, Julia actually, I think she was kind of doing part of this too. And then Andrew, he's also over here doing this part of the ticket system and whatnot. It's like, no, there needs to be someone that's responsible for a particular kind of sector, right? And so you should be able to do that within an esports team. You know, like a jungler, for instance, he's responsible for his routes, but also the ultimate decision on when he's going to gank and when he's not going to gank a particular lane, or, you know, and the final buck, I guess, stops with him in determining if he goes to a lane or not to help out someone, right? So the ownership needs to rely on him, and he can't then go and say to the head coach, well, he told me to go here at bot lane at 4 minutes, dude. Like, what do you want me to do? It's like, no, it's on you, dude. You own that shit, right? So I just think a couple of these concepts, a lot of coaching staffs could at least start to theorize, right, and create their own philosophies about how they want to run a team, because I think just the whole thought process of thinking about your own philosophy is incredibly underrated, and I think that's probably one of the key areas that is missing within the League of Legends coaching sphere. And even though we don't get a whole lot of insight into exactly what the coaches do day to day or whatnot, we could see that there are some problems, there are some cracks. So maybe, you know, this type of idea, I guess, helps out the coaching scene, right?